today. Welcome to the webinar we're hosting here. So glad that you've made the time to join us. We're going to talk about the why, who, and what of your practical manufacturing automation journey. My name is Nate, so I'll be kind of hosting, taking us on the intro and the outro, but Shawn will be the guy who's walking us through the details of the presentation. Just a couple of practical points on the front end here. Feel free to use the question and answer box or the chat feature if you have any questions throughout the presentation. Throw them in there as Shawn's talking. I'll be monitoring those, and on the back end, we've reserved some time to go through those questions. So we'll address them at the back end of the presentation. We're also recording today's session, so afterwards you'll receive a link that'll have some of the resources that we talk about, recording of the webinar, and then if you have any follow-up questions, some next steps on how you can follow up in that way. So I am Nate. I'm a business development representative here at Disher. So just quickly a little bit about me before we get into the real meat and potatoes. I've spent a good chunk of my career in the mechanical engineering world on the Disher team here, and then now I've worked myself into sales and somehow host some webinars for us as well now. But the person that you really need to hear from today is Shawn. So he's one of our subject matter experts when it comes to automation. He's had tons of experience throughout all kinds of different industries. So Shawn, I'll bring you in and let you take it away. Why don't you give us just a little bit about yourself, some of the experience and background that you have, and then get right into it.
Sounds great. Thanks, Nate. So if you've not met me before, my name is Shawn O'Farrell. I'm an automation subject matter expert here at Disher. My background has been in manufacturing operations, and it spanned about a 23-year, it's been a 23-year journey. If you asked me today, or if you asked me 10 years ago today, or even 20 years ago, if I'd be here today doing this, I'd probably tell you, man, I don't know. It's an amazing journey when you're on your career, and I've had the privilege and pleasure to work here at Disher and to serve so many in the community on so many different topics. My expertise here at Disher really revolves around manufacturing operations, manufacturing engineering, and automation. I've got my fingers into a lot of different things. I've done a lot of continuous improvement, lean trainings for companies, leadership trainings for supervisors, and lately, just as recent, I lead our partnership with Hero Robotics in the AMR space. So I've had a lot of exposure in all different kinds of industries, automotive, consumer goods, you see it there. It's amazing how common and similar applications are between industries. If you've ever had the privilege to do that and to go see some of these other manufacturing operations, it's incredible how similar they are, even though their products are totally different. And that's what I'm kind of passionate about. I like bringing the similarities between the different industries together, because there's a lot of thought leadership and knowledge sharing that could happen in those spaces that, well, sometimes there are just some barriers there. So I'm glad you're here today. I want to first say thank you for taking time out of your day to come here and listen to a talk on automation. And it's a good investment, and I hope that you take something away that's useful. The reason why we're here is really, I wanted to go back to the basics. I was actually just listening to a podcast that talked about the Warren Buffett and Berkshire Hathaway's annual meetings. And one of the things they talked about was you can do really complicated things, or you can be really simple and very straightforward in how you invest and how Berkshire invests, and the things they do, and they do really well. And what resonated with me was this idea of going back to the basics, the blocking and tackling of what we do to generate value. And that's what this topic is really all about. It's to talk about the block and tackle, because sometimes we lose it. We're going to go through the why, the who, the what, like we just talked about. So really starting with that why and what your goals and ROI look like, who you choose to do the things that you need done in the automation space, and then things to consider, key considerations, industry trends, just some little tidbits of tips and tricks that I've picked up, over my time and in my experience. So then we'll get into some Q&A. You can fire any questions that you like. And again, thanks for coming. So I want to open up with the why. I have been around so many companies that it's kind of surprising how often they don't really understand why they want to go into automation. I mean, sometimes they talk about the motivation about it from the perspective of, hey, our owner tells us we need to go do. But when you really ask about the why and you kind of deep dive into it, it's a lot like Simon Sinek and the golden circles. And we're really passionate about that here at Disher. If you've ever been here for like a whiteboard as an example, his thesis is we are really good at knowing what we do, and we're pretty good at knowing how we do it. But there are a few people in organizations that really understand why they do what they do. And when you take the perspective of the business, that has implications that go far beyond, the general selling of widgets or goods that you provide, the services you provide. But when we take a different approach and we look at why we automate, that question can become a little sticky. And it has to do a little bit with, sometimes we just don't know why. I mean, I work with companies that are big and small, and all of them really struggle with that idea of why. And it's not because they don't have programs or knowledge owners or leadership that aren't interested in it. It's that they can't really articulate it very well outside of the idea of, we need to put automation in because we can't find enough people, or we need cost improvements or cost savings on our products. All of those things are a why, but usually there's more nuance to them that we don't put a real point to. And so that's what I want to start with today. And I want to talk a little bit about the why, and then work from the why to the how and then to the what. And when we talk about the why, we really want to talk about project objectives and how clearly can we define those. It is so simple and easy to really take people who do automation down the wrong path unintentionally if we can't articulate clearly what the project objectives are. The scope, the success metrics, and ownership of the project get lost in translation. And honestly, we usually try to talk about those in terms of our statement of works. We articulate the core requirements of a project that we need. And many of us probably on this call have something similar that's already standard there. But there are certain things about the why that I think get lost because they don't really tie in nicely to the bottom line and what the ROI expectations are. So I'll give you an example. A lot of times companies will identify the cost save that they need to get out of a project. What they don't always articulate is, we're doing it because not just that we can't find people to do it, but it's an unsafe operation and we need to improve our metrics around safety. And we can tie that project to our safety metrics. Again, the decision-making process around how you go about picking out projects, a lot of times, if we're honest, really just revolve around that ROI and the dollar perspective of the project. But there is more value that is out there and that should be articulated when you go to do an automation project. There's a human element here that we're working on and we're trying to improve, whether we're improving the safety or we're trying to get people into more value-add operations, because the goal of our automation project, as an example, isn't to really cut overhead or cut labor. It's to shift them into value-add work. And a lot of customers that I work with struggle with that. How do you articulate that to people who are putting the dollars and cents onto the budget and giving you that empowerment to go and execute the project? So I always really harness a lot of that energy around, get that why understood really, really well, and don't just focus on dollars and cents. So how do we define the objectives? Well, if you've never done this before, this can be quite a daunting task. And I usually just like to have an is not kind of perspective with this. So understanding and articulating with the team who the project is for and who it's not for. Understanding where the boundaries of the project is. What is the project and what is not the project? Understanding where and when it is due. Remember, you're putting an ROI on a project that has an investment timeline. You are putting some kind of system in place that you hope to get an ROI of a payback period for an investment. You're trying to improve maybe a suffering safety figure. Maybe we need to really get something in place because we just simply can't hire enough people. Whatever that is, you gotta kind of define what those objectives are really up front and be very clear about it. Because if you don't do things like when is it due, oh my, those quotes and RFQs can sit out there for ages because your sources for delivery, well, they'll just take their time to build it out. And I really like to define objectives in one sentence. So why are we really doing this? Why are we doing this project from the start? And what I've found interesting working and consulting with companies is that sometimes you'll get 3 people in the same department and all 3 of them have a different why. Or one person will have the why, another person will have a different why that might be more empowering, but we don't talk about it because they have maybe a stronger personality. We really need to coalesce the team around understanding one direction. We all want to pull the rope one direction, and that's the focus when we talk about doing automation projects. These projects typically can be quite expensive. Let's make sure we do them successfully by starting with that. How do we define the project successes? Well, this is kind of a common way of looking at, what are your KPIs and goals and objectives? How is the project measured and who's responsible for conducting the work? This is really kind of an important part that goes into the upfront. A lot of project managers do a lot of this. Like our project managers, when they work with our clients outside of the automation space, our project management team will focus a lot on these kinds of measurables and metrics to make sure that when they go and bid work for our customers, that they're doing the right thing to get the right solution in-house. I'm sure some of you on this call have been involved in quotes or even project delivery where you couldn't actually measure what the project's success was. You knew that you were putting the thing in, but there was nothing to tell you whether or not you actually achieved what you set out for other than getting the system in place. And that's very frustrating for everybody. We don't want that. We want to win. It's like playing football. You want to put up a good score and you want to measure how you're doing because you're going to continue to work on improvements and cost saves and all those things. Justifying the ROI. I talked about this a little bit ago, but how are you doing ROI in your justification for doing the project? Are you improving safety? Are we simply building more things faster or cheaper? Are we working with less human labor? And you should really know what your ROI target is before you go out and invest. And that ROI should not just be financial. It should be the other elements. I'll give you an example of this that's very recent. I have a client right now that I'm working with, and we're putting micro dots on little parts. They're very small, 6 millimeters in diameter, and we're putting micro dots on the surface of this part. The component of throughput on this process is very slow because they're doing it by hand. And not only are they doing it by hand, the person who's doing this does this job every day, and they use a little dauber to put these little dots on. And you see the need for increased throughput because they have sales that they can't meet in the marketplace. But man, can you imagine using a dauber, like using fingernail polish as an example, and putting little dots on your fingernails day in and day out, nonstop, and you still can't make the orders that you need, that your customers are screaming on the phone for you to deliver. Carpal tunnel was a huge question when I saw that operation, and I went, whoa, we need to do something totally different here, and the focus needs to be on not going down that path of the carpal tunnel cost, because that's a future cost that you will have to deal with if you don't put the system in to get rid of that kind of activity and then free up that resource to go do something that is value add within the operation outside of putting tiny paint dots on parts. The ROI in that case is very easy to calculate. We can produce a machine that can dot things faster, relatively speaking. But putting that employee into a position where they don't have to worry if they can open their hands at the end of the day because their fingers are stuck holding something that's not there. I mean, that's an ROI that we all can get behind, I think. Benchmarks. So these are some typical benchmarks that I've been exposed to. I'll just go on the record and say your mileage will vary depending upon your organization. GAAP is wildly variant in terms of what ownership requires for paybacks. These are just some various ones that if you've never done this before, general ones. So general purpose capital equipment. Think injection molding machines. I've seen capital equipment purchases in under 10 years that pay back, sometimes faster depending upon who you buy from. Purpose-built automation for limited life programs. So think like automotive. If you do interior components, that's where I came from. Typically, you would want to pay back that automation at a bare minimum within the program schedule life. And then usually, if you can beat it by a year, that would even be better too. And then automation of human labor, 2 to 3 years, fully loaded in terms of costing for team members. That's typically what we see. Everybody wants to push the envelope. They want it faster. They want 2 years. They want 1.5 years. The problem that you run into when you get into ROI that is that fast is depending upon the number of people that you're going to move into other value add operations. That quantity of people really impacts the kind of ROI that you see. Examples in the automation space for AMRs, if you are offsetting labor because you don't want people pushing carts, that person's labor has to go someplace else and produce something of value for your company. Well, if you don't have a whole lot of people that you're offsetting in that space, the robots that you put in place are going to be expensive regardless of how many people you put in, but the cycle times will vary dramatically as well. And so when you get into that kind of space, it's harder to get that automated solution to pay off as fast as you would like. And it's a balancing act. You could go super cheap and do things that are really inexpensive. However, there are risks associated with that also add to extended costs. I've seen companies where they buy really inexpensive equipment only to come to find out they can't get spare parts for it. There's a lot of downtime associated with the machine because it's locked out. It comes from overseas and you are 12 hours out of sync with the company that sold it to you. So these are things when you talk about ROI, you got to consider when you go to deploy. And flexible solutions equal better redeployment. The more flexible you are in your projects, that has an ROI to it as well, because at the end of the life cycle for the equipment that you have, let's say you have a robotic arm that's doing welding. If you can redeploy that robot, obviously that's a better investment because now you've paid off that robot and now it's basically printing money for you, or welding money in this case. If you need help in ROIs and calculating ROIs, there's a great tool that I like to use. It's from automate.org. There's a QR code on the screen. You can click on a link later. But there's a robotics ROI calculator that is actually, it's pretty good. And the reason why I say that is it makes some assumptions for you that you may not consider. That tool will add electricity costs over the life of life of ownership. It includes budgeting for rebuilds and refurbs if necessary, depending upon the application. So it takes into account some other things that you may not think about when you're looking at justification for your project. And you can put in all of the same kinds of things we're talking about: the number of labor hours, the number of people, cost per standard hour, the cost of an individual at standard rate on an annual basis. You can do all those things. So highly recommend it. Check it out after the webinar here. Okay. If you know why you're doing something, let's talk about the who. There are so many different people to look at. I mean, I'll be at the Automate show here next week. If you get a chance to go there, you can come see me. I'll be at a booth at Theora Robotics because we're looking at supporting AMR customers and moving products. The who is very important because there are so many different options. You don't really know always who's the right who. So I want to talk a little bit about that. I want to couch some of the who's that are out there, and just let's just think through what is the most effective use of my resources to get this job done. And there are so many choices, and I just made a quick list here for you to kind of consider. And these are the kind of couching of partners that I like to go through with my clients. So the first one is internal team. You can buy hardware from an OEM. There are some hardware OEMs that also provide system integration services. You can get support from a system integrator. And then there's this last one here, owner's rep. And all of these have good things. And all of these things have risks. And all of these things, I would recommend you put on the table and have a good discussion with your team on. So let's talk about what these are and what does this really mean for you when you go down that path. So let's talk about integration in-house. So vertical integration. A couple of key questions to ask. Do you have the right expertise and experience to execute? And remember, expertise and experience are two totally different things. You can have a really strong technical team on your staff, and if they've never implemented a welding robot like you see in the picture here, there's a lot of upside risk associated with that. And there's a lot of upside benefit that goes along with that too. Can your team fully support the solution? Well, a part of it is if they've never done the welding, you have to get them trained in welding. And maybe you do have people that are trained in welding, but have never done robotic welding. And so you have to invest in that. It's not just the robot in this case. You got to invest in all of the infrastructure needed for your people to be able to support it. And that's really a key question to ask. And I always encourage my customers, ask this one in particular, because when it comes to the delivery of any system you get, the more vertically integrated you are, you can upskill your team, and you don't have to be beholden to others if there's a problem when those problems arise. And I don't mean that in a bad way, but if you're in manufacturing and you have a piece of equipment that needs to keep running, sometimes you can't afford to wait 3 days for a service tech to come in and fix your machine. You need to have somebody in-house right now. So it may not be a 100% we're going to do it all in-house, but you should have a plan for vertical integration with your team to upskill them and to make sure that you can support it, so that way you can deal with those oh no moments that occur in manufacturing that I know all of you have probably experienced before. OEM hardware providers. So you can buy, like for example, if you go to Automate next week, you can go meet all these OEMs that sell wonderful products. You know, the first thing I'll say is products at these shows like Automate, they're tools. The tool is there to solve a specific problem. And because of that, these hardware providers are very product-focused specialists. And usually they do one thing and they do it really well. And that one thing may be selling you a whole bunch of stuff, and you could probably buy a lot of gear from one manufacturer that does one thing, right? There's a company that just focuses on sensors, or they just focus on pneumatics, robots, cobots. You can pick whatever you like. But some of these OEMs typically don't integrate their own hardware for a client. You could find the best robot in the world only to be told you have to go talk to a provider that will integrate it on your behalf. So it's interesting when you walk through some of these shows, you'll see a lot of this. And when you go to shows, and trade shows in particular, if you've never been to them before, you're going to see a lot of the state of the art, or I like to call the bleeding edge of technology. Some of the things that you see there are very, very cool, but you got to have somebody in the field that can integrate it. And sometimes the products that are really, really cool, the companies that can integrate them do not have specialists in those product families yet, because they've just released. So you got to be careful about that, and just understand where the boundaries are in terms of what can be delivered. Now, some OEMs will do system integration as well. They'll offer hardware and application support, so they can give you turnkey solutions as an example. However, they are typically limited in scope, because the hardware and solutions they sell have to fall within the vertical that they support. Support and scalability varies. You can get people to do some of these things, but they may have a limited team in order to actually get the implementation for your project off the ground. And so timing and cost and all of those things come into play. So you just got to be careful about who those partners are and what are you buying. The other thing I'd say about this is, and there's really nothing, again, this is not a problem with anyone that's out there that does this, that are OEMs who do system integrations. They believe in their product enough to do the integration for you. What you have to remember also is, if you're new to the process of automation, one of the things you should consider is standardization. And because of the breadth, broad offerings that are out there in the world in this space, if you go down the path with an OEM, you may get a better price, but you may have to lock in with them in order to get really reap the benefits of that. And when you become a single sourced kind of company, you'll do one thing and then you'll always go back to that OEM for service or more projects. Again, there's nothing wrong with that, but you just have to go in eyes wide open and know that's the strategy that you want to adopt. There are good things and bad things about being a single directed source kind of company where you only have a handful of hardware that you stock. It simplifies any of your service that you do. However, there are also applications where if you don't diversify and that company has trouble supplying you, let's think about COVID for a second, you may have a problem getting parts and then getting additional services, and it just becomes a bit of a snowball after that. So you just got to go in eyes wide open on how that works. System integrators. Man, there are a lot of awesome system integrators in the area. The client requests a solution, the system integrator creates a quote, and it's based on the solution that's requested, and it's pretty highly transactional. System integrators who I really have affinities for, your Mission, JR, Copes, Xtoll, there's Eagle, there's a whole bunch of system integrators out there that are just absolutely incredible. You have to go in eyes wide open on that too. Their job is to get you a solution. There may be walls and barriers to entry with some of them because of the size they are, and that's okay. They serve a specific client and a type of client, and there's nothing wrong with that. But you do need to communicate clearly on your side when you work with them what the why is, because if you don't do that, they may go down the path of quoting something that is not your why. And then if you've ever had a bid sheet come in and it's 30 pages long, it will absolutely block and tackle for them about why you're getting what you're getting. And you got to be very careful about those situations. So again, system integrators are great. I work with them. They work with us here at Disher. Wonderful partnerships that we have. It's just another option that you look at. And a lot of companies, especially smaller companies, they may struggle with finding a system integrator, especially if your project is small, to really get in the door to get a quote, or they'll just simply say, yeah, I'm sorry that there's not enough meat on this bone to make it worth our while. This last one here is owner's reps, and the owner's reps model really we at Disher do a lot of, and not just for someone like me who focuses in this space or in the operations space, but even with our project managers. We work as an owner's rep on behalf of the client and in their best interest. So we have a lot of technical expertise, historical knowledge, things that we bring to the table that really add value to you. And it prioritizes relationships and value on your behalf. We tend to be more relational when we operate, and we help clarify some of the mud that might be out there, the fog that's out there around what solution might be the best fit for the application that you have. Owners reps also typically have more flexible pricing models. It could be T&M or it can be fixed bid, but upfront budgeting is key. And the reason why I say that is when you have an owner's rep, you have this resource that is working on your behalf, and you may or may not be able to roll that into a fixed bid quote or put it in as a part of capital, depending upon how your business works. And so if it's an expense, you just want to know that up front going in. Again, there's nothing wrong one way or the other with it, but you just got to be upfront about that and plan ahead. And I know that Sam, who's part of our sales team, he actually put out a really good post on LinkedIn about that specific topic. Budgeting upfront is key for this. And this is one of those things where even if you don't have an owner's rep, or let's say you have a project manager instead that's doing some of this work, baking that cost and timing into your solution, especially if you're a small to mid-sized manufacturer, you got to have that in there because you're going to want that. And we'll talk a little bit about that here in just a moment. That gets into the what. So what are we doing and what are the solutions that we're looking for? And a big part of this is project expectations. Any automation project, you can always expect multiple phases. And if it's your first time, it may look something like this. 50% of the time you spend up front will be planning. It'll be defining scope. It'll be defining the why. You'll be looking for the who and getting bids on the who, getting feedback on your SOW, refining the SOW and redistributing it so you can get bids on the project again. 20% of the project is execution. You're going to actually do the thing that you need done for the automation solution that you're looking at. And then the part that usually gets looked over that doesn't really get talked about is this 30% of continuous improvement. Now, why do I say there's 30% continuous improvement? Why is that not a part of execution? Because when you have a solution provider give you a solution, like an automation solution of any scale or size, if you have ever been in the environment where you're an integrator, you know that you're going to build this machine and you're going to spend a ton of time programming it. And then while you're programming it, you're going to figure out that the CAD wasn't quite right. And you got to change these holes and you got to change the end of arm tooling and you got to reposition things because all plans are just that. They're plans. And so when you're going about using the system, the automated solution talks to you. It tells you where your gaps are. It's not that the system necessarily fails you. We design the system to solve a problem. We need to listen to it and fix the things that tells us you didn't think of this, because it's really hard to really capture all of the things that are in your automated solution, especially if you're doing turnkey solutions that are very customized. They're not like off-the-shelf machines that you would buy online. I'm talking about custom, robots that are moving fenders for cars and they're going through multiple steps to be produced. That's a very custom solution. I'm not talking about a machine that it'll shrink wrap a box for you. Those machines have been worked on and improved on to the point where they can basically, you plug it in, you set it up, you do a little bit of tweaking and you throw the switch to turn it on and off it goes. I know it's not always that simple, but you get the idea. When you're talking about what we're going to do, always start with that strong RFQ. I like to include a lot of different topics in the RFQ, and it's going to depend on the project, obviously, but here's a great list of things. A current state and future state map of your process. I would always start with that because that tells you where the waste and the bottlenecks are. I do that a lot for clients. Highly recommend it if you know what a current state, future state value stream map looks like. It can even be a business process map too if you need, but those are very, very important. Verify your CAD. I've been in projects where I've seen it. The CAD shows where to put the machine, and then you go out to the floor, and someone forgot to put a building column on the map, and you can't actually put the machine where the map says you're supposed to put the machine. So always be very careful about CAD in particular. Current state and actual state, your actual cycle times. What are you doing now, and what is the gap between what you're currently doing and what your target is? So make sure that you get those cycle times in place. Takt time and customer-related take rates. Include a contingency factor. This is something that also gets missed quite a bit. Let's say you're in an automotive industry, when you get RFQs for making parts, you'll get a take rate, a daily take rate, or an estimated take rate. It's usually in weeks, parts per week or parts per month, but depending on the customer. And then what you'll also get is in your contract language, it says you must include a 15% windage factor if they need to increase throughput. So when you are building this machine, it has to steady state hit one rate, but then you got to be able to hit over a short period of time that 15% increase. my experience is that usually that 15% increase isn't short term, it's typically all the time, especially when you're dealing in things like trucks or SUVs that are high value. And yeah, that contingency number just keeps creeping up. And there comes a point where you got to trigger, hey, we need to buy more equipment. And that's always a fun conversation if you've ever been involved in that before. Process and information flows. This is also important too. How do people know how to operate the equipment when you actually have the equipment present? This is kind of an important thing when you're talking about setting up the machine. If you want the machine to tie directly into your MRP or ERP, you got to tell your integrator that up front, so that way that they plan ahead of time. Hey, I got to have database connectivity. We do a lot of work in Ignition, and so we do a lot of that cross connectivity between MRP and ERP and scheduling and getting information directly into machines, calling up recipes automatically, those kinds of things. Establish your clear goals and metrics, visible and measurable. That's very important too, because when you accept the system, you got to make sure that what you wanted, the company promised, and that they delivered. And sometimes if there's any kind of gray area around goals and metrics, usually that's not a good thing and you get a negative outcome, especially in the relationship side. Make sure you include your standards, especially if you're doing things in food, pharma, military spec, that kind of thing. Have a solid project manager and make sure you have hours associated with the quote. I cannot speak highly enough. If you are going to deliver projects successfully, get a project manager. The project manager's job is to manage the project. And not everyone is equipped to do that. And not everyone has the right tool belt and skill set to accomplish that successfully. So we do a lot of project management here. I can't speak highly enough of that team. Please make sure you budget for that. Make sure your subject matter experts are involved throughout the process of an RFQ all the way through installation. I know sometimes I've seen it where subject matter experts are brought in just to formulate the plan, and then they're ejected from the team because they need to go set up another plan. But if they leave during installation and during execution, they miss some key learnings sometimes that could impact other projects. So just make sure that they're always involved on some level. Team training and pre-launch validations. Yeah, that's another one that gets overlooked a lot, especially on the pricing side. If you've bought a machine before and all you get is a 3-ring binder with a really kind of okay instruction on how to run it. If you've ever experienced that before, you know how frustrating that can be. Make sure that you clearly identify what's expected of training and pre-launch validations to get through your run it rates and things like that. Project closeout. Closing a project strong is also very, very important. Your project managers will know that inside and out. Make sure that you talk to your client or you talk to your vendor and make sure that they're involved in, hey, we need to get this thing done and we want to do it well. And a part of your closeout could be lessons learned. Just sitting down and talking about what worked and what didn't. What would you do in improved future state for project delivery? Again, solid project managers will do that for you. And then finally, safety risk assessments and follow-ups to those. This is one where companies, especially integrators that I have found, they'll do them, but they're very formulaic in nature. And if you've done a lot of integration or you've worked with integrators before, this isn't always the kind of work that they want to do. I'll just be honest with you. Safety risk assessments take time, they take skill, and there are companies out there that do them very, very well. In fact, we know one that we partner with quite a bit, but we also do them too. And having the time to do a safety risk assessment can save people's lives. And this is something where companies could save money and not do them, but they need to be done well and with care. So please make sure that you include that in your RFQ. Okay. Yeah, the humanoid robots. Let's talk about the hype machine. I have a lot of choice words for the humanoid robot experience right now. And like AI and technology in general. I personally look at value add. It's so interesting when you look today at what's cool isn't always value add. You don't see a lot as an example. I'm going to pick on humanoid robots right now because they seem to be taking all the air, oxygen out of the room. Um, they can do some amazing things. I don't begrudge them at all. However, when a company builds an AMR or a robot like this, doesn't matter what it is, if you can't get a repeatability study from them, if you can't get reliability information out of them, when you look at videos of a humanoid robot with a couple of hands and they're picking up a part off of a table and they put it into a bin and they're only doing it using their vision system, that's incredible technology. However, does it really outperform current technology? I can create a program with a very standard off-the-shelf robot that has a camera pointing down using an AI model, and it can pick stuff up out of bins and put them into other bins, and I can do it a lot faster than, in a lot of cases, these robots. Can it perform a useful task? I think it's really impressive that some of the humanoid robots can dance, but I'm sorry, in the manufacturing space, dancing is not really a value-added process. So accuracy, repeatability, consistency in its work, those are the things that I really focus on. Battery life, especially when it comes to robots that are mobile and they're not always tethered to the wall. Is it practical to use them? What's the recovery cost on a battery? It's typically zero. It's a negative. It's kind of a negative investment anyway. I mean, you have these batteries that are really, really high energy density, and you're going to recycle them, which means you got to pay for that, and then to do it safely. And then you also have to replace it, which also costs money. So you just got to be careful about, can the battery life really support the operation that you're looking at? There's a total cost of ownership. Who's selling parts and service? And are you tied into a service agreement with this specific vendor of this technology? Those are questions that are very important because some places they get you on service. It's not necessarily about selling you the robot or the solution. It's about getting you on service. And then, are there new infrastructure needs that you require in your building? Do you need new power? Do you have to have lifts? You got to finish your floors and get rid of cracks and uneven floors. New totes. You have to label the totes, like you see there with the April tags. Do you have charge stations you have to install? I mean, there's a lot of things that go into selecting the what, and especially when it comes to the hype train around some of the new technology that you see. I watched one of these robots do the part sorting, and when you looked really closely at the background changed, and the bins changed. So the success rate of it actually picking up, you could call into question. It did one really well, but why did they cut away from the video of this robot only to pick up another object when things are totally different? So again, just go in eyes wide open. Don't believe the hype. There was a customer of ours that once shared with me that their ownership said, we must have collaborative robots in our building. Why? Because they are the future, and they became a bleeding edge adopter of cobots. And it turned out that nobody really thought through the application component of them, and they spent a lot of money putting cobots in that subsequently got sidelined because you couldn't actually do the jobs that they thought that they could at that time. Now, this was many, many years ago. But you don't want to be necessarily in that space unless you have money that you're willing to invest in, and there's a good reason why. So I hope at some point that this technology, it's going to crowbar its way into all of our lives. I just hope that it's not halfway done. I really hope that there's this ownership component of it's going to add value. And right now, I really struggle to see it, I'll be honest with you. So let's just recap real quick. Start smart. Know your goals, why you're doing what you're doing, understand the scope and really clearly define it, and get a good ROI and understanding of what your expectations are for the ROI. And make sure that your ROI is reasonable, and it includes all of those intangibles that sometimes we take for granted, like safety. Choose your who very carefully and make sure that you get the right provider. Ask the question, be honest, Could you do it yourself? What are the risks of doing it yourself? Could you look at an OEM and maybe do it yourself with some of their help? Maybe you go to the OEM and they sell you a turnkey, or you hire a system integrator, or you rely on somebody who's an owner's rep to be that beacon for you on picking out who's the right who. And then finally, prepare for the what. Get your RFQs in line, make sure the execution is solid and that you're managing it well. Make sure that you have a project manager managing these projects. You do not want to have scope creep and costs pile up because we missed things. You need someone focused on that part, and avoid the hype until you see technology that is very, very robust, even if it's really cool and you're seeing it come across on your TikTok and you see these little shorts of all these things. Just remember, what you are seeing is very carefully crafted, because let's be honest, the hype train is there to get more investment. And what you don't want to do is be the person who's stuck holding the bag when that hype train comes to a screeching halt and bulldozes you over when the solution doesn't work. So just be careful about all of that, but also don't be afraid to engage in new technology, and just do it with respect to the risks that are associated with it. All right. Well, I hope that you enjoyed the talk here. I know we can talk a little bit here about Q&A, and yeah, I'd love to field any questions, and we can talk a little bit more about what's on your mind.
That's great. Thanks, Shawn. Really appreciate you taking us through your presentation. And one of the things that I think is really unique about you is you've experienced projects all the way from someone who's not automated anything before in their manufacturing process and helped them start taking those initial steps, all the way up to folks who have big throughput, big volumes, right? Have a lot of industry weight, so to speak, and complexity to deal with, and you've implemented on that side of the spectrum and everywhere in between. And seeing all those different spots really gives you a broad experience to go back on, and to pull some of those pain points and spots where people get stuck out for this presentation. So thanks for walking us through that. We've got a couple minutes left here. So if anyone does have a specific question that they're facing, maybe there's a pain point that Shawn talked about in his presentation that stuck out to you, and you've got a practical question, feel free to throw that in the chat, and we would love to go over that. But I do see that we've got some people here who've joined that are both on the smaller side, and probably automation is, they're more curious about how to get into it. And we've got some people on the larger side too. For someone who's in that boat of, they think that they need to automate, but they're not really sure what those next steps might look like, Shawn, what would you have recommendations for somebody who finds themselves in that camp right now?
Yeah, the discernment component on when you automate and when you don't, really, it's very specific to the application that the company is faced with. Smaller organizations, smaller companies, it tends to be more, they kind of fall into two categories depending upon the company it is. But one category would be there's a simple step, like a step function that you can go through that can help you automate a process. And if you're a smaller company that you don't have big budgets, and you're not sure, like you're trying to solve like a smaller value add problem that's within the process. I always like to first focus on not the automation space, but the standardization space. So as an example, if you have a person that's doing a manual task, are they doing the task as successfully as you could do it with that individual? You have a very smart, capable individual doing something, and it doesn't really matter what it is. A person has a lot of gifts, and you want to harness those gifts first. I always talk about doing standard work, and and removing the ability for the person to make a bad choice. And those bad choices could lead to, say, scrap or rework operations. And doing simple things with your standard work can sometimes be just as powerful as putting in a robot or doing some other automated activity. And so if you're a smaller operation and you've never done that before, I usually, when I come on site to do like a productivity assessment as an example, we'll walk down the processes that you have, and then I'll share with you some things that you don't have to spend a lot of money on to get some productivity throughput improvements on or quality improvements on. And then we'll also identify, if you do that step, that unlocks now the next thing that you can do, like automation. Because if you're not getting everything you can out of the current state process, and you're going to look at doing a small step improvement for, let's say a couple $1,000 versus buying a $100,000 work cell, there may be a need to jump all the way there, but we really want to discern that and make sure that it's a good investment. And I'm a big proponent of being a good steward of resources. I don't always think that jumping into the automation space and doing lots of robots and automated stations and things like that are always the right fit for what you're doing. Sometimes we can actually do more while doing less. And again, it's kind of hit and miss. It depends on the application, obviously, in the company, but focus on that. And really, if you're a bigger organization as well, that rule still applies too. I mean, if you have bigger budgets and you're doing more CapEx expenses, you can still move mountains just by doing the simple blocking and tackling, putting in lean practices, standardized work, doing hijunka and levelizing operations so that way you don't create large inventory buckets in your building. There's a lot of things that you can do in those spaces that really don't cost a lot of money, but they do cost human effort. And sometimes there's system changes that come along with that. And system changes result in culture change. And as we all know, culture change is hard. And sometimes I think we give automation a little bit of a, well, if I put the automation in, I don't have to deal with the cultural component. No, you really have to, because if you put the robot in and your culture is changed by that automation, all you're doing is kicking the can down the line. At some point, you're going to have to talk to people and go why you did what you did, or the implications of having that hardware in your building that you didn't really think about before, and the implication on the people that you have. So there's a little bit of discernment that needs to go into those kinds of activities.
Yeah, that's great. And I think that how complex automation is and can be, for some people, they might look at it as a silver bullet, and
yeah,
it needs to be approached with discernment and wisdom and walk through those steps like you talked about to ensure that you do get to a successful end. And similarly, for some folks, they're looking at automation thinking that they might need to jump in, but they're thinking in their heads of 10 or 20 steps down the line of an extremely complex implementation, when there might be some low-hanging fruit, easy wins of smaller steps in that automation journey that can have some real impact on their team. So that dovetails really nicely into the follow-up here. So if you're interested in continuing this conversation or exploring how these automation concepts might apply to your specific challenges, we would love to help with that. And if you want to switch to that next slide there, Shawn. One way we can do that is scheduling a workshop. So that's a 1 hour structured time with a group of engineers like Shawn to walk through whatever specific issue you might be dealing with or opportunity that you might see to improve your manufacturing. We also offer some paid workshops, which are a little bit more in-depth, a little more in-depth and longer time frame to dig into those even deeper. And Shawn also mentioned earlier in the presentation that there'll be a handful of us at Automate this coming week. So if you see us there, flag us down, let us know that you saw us here in the webinar, and we'd love to chat with you then as well. And then if there's anything specific that you'd want to reach out and just get some thoughts on, I've got my email here at the bottom. Feel free to shoot me an email. I won't be scared away. I'd love to hear what you're thinking and what problems you might be facing. And like we mentioned as well, on the back side of this, we'll send out some resources, my email in case you don't get a chance to write that down, as well as a recording of the presentation here as well. So I want to thank you, Shawn, for walking us through and sharing your experience. And I want to also thank all of the participants that you guys made the time to join us here today, and hope that that you got some good nuggets of how you can tackle this automation and really turn that into something that's powerful and effective for your organization. So with that, we will sign off, and hope everyone has a good rest of your day.
Thanks, everyone.